Good morning, good afternoon, and good night, wherever you're tuning in. We are Slava and Jonathan, bringing you the Side Quest podcast, where we talk about character development, stories, and all things that are world building. And we occasionally take side quests, because, frankly, that's how conversations work. Just as a reminder, this whole show is spoiler heavy. So sit back, tune in, and join us on this episode of Side Quest. Good morning, everyone. Whether it's morning or evening for you, it's morning somewhere, because space-time continuum. Welcome back to the show where we have books that we read and side quests that we go on.
Indeed.
And we call ourselves Yubba Dabba Ding Dong. It's good for SEO.
Right.
Very unique.
Right. No, totally. I'll put that in the meta headers.
Good. Appreciate that. I want to make sure we're hitting the right feeds, right?
I say that you handled that introduction handily.
Yeah, I saw that in your notes. I saw all of your punny things that you've written. But today we're back for Skysworn, Cradle Book 4, to join our friends Lindon and Yaren and Orthos. Orthos has some really fun moments in this book.
Yes.
And we get some vulnerability from Ethan, which is nice.
Right.
And Will Wight doesn't pull any punches. Literally.
Yep. Well, you can't pull a lot of punches if you
lose an arm.
One arm.
Yeah. Well, Slava, give us a quick rundown. But first, make sure to smash that subscribe button so that you never miss out on a side quest.
Righto. So, let's set the scene for the folks. Lindon finally deals with Jai Long, but loses, and Jai Long takes his arm. Fisher Gesha helps Lindon create a prosthetic arm using the hunger binding from the ancestor's spear. During the duel, Ethan uncovers the crimes of Jai Daisho, who opened the Drag God's labyrinth to steal an archstone. By opening the labyrinth, Jai Daishu has awoken the bleeding phoenix. Ethan is sent to ask the Kura family monarch for help, and she agrees to aid them, but warns that they will be alone next time. A greater calamity is on the horizon. Lindon and Yaren joins Skysworn to fight the Bleeding Phoenix and Red Moon Hall, a sect of sacred artists who use the powers of the Bleeding Phoenix. Yaren reveals her Blood Shadow, a creature of the Bleeding Phoenix, and ultimately overpowers and gains control of it. It can act as a double outside her body. The Kura monarch fights and defeats the Bleeding Phoenix, for now. Ethan also reveals his intention to take Lindon and Yaren to the top. He shows Lindon a vision in his Abaddon bead from an ascendant ancient ancestor, Azrael. Azrael's recorded message reveals the nature of Cradle within the universe and the other worlds that the Abaddon care for. He asks them to join him and ascend, not as part of the Abaddon, but as a part of a separate group that he leads. The Dread Gods are stirring in their slumber and will soon awaken once more.
Exciting. So I told Slava before we got to this that book 4 is the most forgettable book, which is not a great selling point, right? But the reason that takes place is book 4 is the shortest of the books, and book 4 is the completion of something we've been waiting 2 books for. So the end of Soulsmith, Lindon is challenged to a duel because of Ethan with Jai Long. And then book 3, they don't have the duel. And the book ends. And now we're in book 4. And so it's basically like 2 books to get to this duel that we've been waiting for, which, to Will Wight's credit, having a buildup of knowing where a character is going, huge. Just huge. Because most books don't tell you where the character's going. And so you're like, I don't know what's up. We just finished Ubik, right? I don't know where the character's going, and so I have nothing to look forward to. So, although book 4 feels forgettable, the problem is that book 4 is actually the fulfillment of books 2 and 3 for this thing that we've been looking forward to the whole time. And it's a transition point because now we've discovered this thing called the Dread Gods, and we learn more about, like, there are different levels that we haven't been given insight into yet. I think that my quippy book 4 is forgettable is because I was rereading it, right, for this thing, and it's not that it's forgettable, it's that it blends in and it's absorbed by other books. Book 4 just feels like an interlude rather than a full book, which is the problem. Which makes it hard to discern book 3 from book 5 because it's just like, oh, well, we've been waiting for this fight for 2 books. So,
And despite having really cool moments, like Orthos asking Lindon what kind of soulsmith builds a spine, there's quippy little things like that.
And why aren't we on the ground yet? Why are we so high up?
Orthos relieving himself of off of the 1,000-mile cloud. All this kind of thing, they're fun. The fight's even fun. The fight's written well. The duel. Lindon losing his arm is like, you're like, holy crap, wow.
Did that catch you off guard?
A little bit, yeah.
Yep. Yeah, because you don't think that a main character is going to get handicapped, right?
Right. And the backstory for Yaren is cool. The few scenes with the bleeding phoenix and the overpowering red color that absorbs the world and like the characters within that dealing with like what the hell's going on situation. All those things were cool. So the book was not boring.
No.
But there parts of the story felt lackluster. They're like, oh, okay. And then, oh, Ortho says something funny. And then like, oh, okay, they're falling off the thing. Yaren then looks like she broke every bone in her body, but nope, she's okay. And then they're in the prison and they're talking. And the captain of the Skysworn guard is a big, just annoying asshole.
He's a curmudgeon.
Right.
I really thought you would have liked Narugwe.
I was like, whatever. I didn't. I don't know why. I didn't hate him, but I was like, okay, shut up and let's get on with it. And then you have, the fight scenes, the duel, Orthos being funny, background story of Yaren's uninvited guest. Everything in between is kind of like, But I can't say I hated the book because I thought it was great. I finished it in like 2 days.
Yeah. Well, and it's a short book, right? So
that too.
Let me ask you a question. So I mentioned earlier, like, it takes us 2 books to get to this fight. Did you even notice that the duel with Jai Long took us 2 books to get to?
Yeah.
You did notice it. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because it was announced in Soulsmith.
Yeah, at the end of Soulsmith.
He trained for it in Black Flame.
Uh-huh.
And he participated in it in Skysworn.
Right.
Yeah. I was tracking that.
Okay. I feel like the first time I read it, there's this like anticipation waiting for it. And you're like, oh, well, he's probably going to fight him in book 3 then, because you get the introduction in book 2, but it doesn't happen. And you're like, what? And it like leaves you wanting more, which then drives you to just quickly get into the next book. So I'm glad that I didn't get into these books until like book 7 or 8, I think, because then I didn't have to wait for Skysworn, because I really think that if I had read Black Flame and Skysworn wasn't out, I'd probably be disappointed because it just wasn't enough. And that's the telltale sign of like great world building, right? Like, to your credit, Roadside Picnic, like, why haven't they written more books, right? Like, you could do so much with that world, and you don't even need to explain all the things to me. Hellfire or Sticky Fire, what is it? Hell something?
Hell Sludge.
Hell Slime. I'm pretty sure it's slime. Anyway, it's like there's so much you can do. On the other side, like, for those who aren't really familiar with Will Wight, he actually has been done with Cradle emotionally for a long time. And so the fact that we got 12 books is a really great thing. But he's like, I want to write something new. And so he wrote another piece that's in the same universe, because Will Wight is like he's like the cousin author of Patrick Rothfuss mixed with Brandon Sanderson. So, like, for those who haven't caught it, Little Blue is basically Syl, right? Like, let's just call it what it is.
I called it the first time I met Little Blue.
Yeah, which is fine. Like,
and not everything has to be original. If it's fun, I don't care. But he's able to put something in the story that we look forward to and weave it in. Like, okay, Yaren's unwelcome guest. We get introduced to that in book 1. We haven't really gotten any additional information on it. Now it's book 4. So he's really good at like leaving things and dropping little clues, very much like Rothfuss. Sanderson does it too, but I think Rothfuss is clearer on his like, hey, this is a clue, but like not drawing attention to it. And then with Sanderson, he's very much like, hey, I need people to anticipate where the character's going. So it's just like he does such a good job, similar to both of them, but in his own unique fashion. And it's like I really haven't found a better term for this, but like flash fiction, where it's like it's not flash fiction because that's like a short story basically, but it's poppy and it's fun and it's fast, right?
Yeah, even the slow parts here move fast. Everything is constantly moving, and that's why when you said this was anime in book form, I was sold faster than I was for Sanderson.
Sure. No. Yeah. 100%.
Although I started this after Sanderson,
Mm-hmm.
but I love anime. I love the fast parts of anime. I love the silly parts of anime, as long as it's not, teenage girls, demon hunter nonsense like that, which to each his own. But for me, I like more long form story anime where there's like an overarching plot and there's many subplots and there's characters that you follow for 7 episodes and then you're doing another character arc or story arc and you're like, meet the guy in episode 7, you meet him again in episode 15.
Yep.
So I like that kind of anime, and I like more darker stories. Death Note comes to mind, Monster comes to mind, or like Titan. But those kind of serial, multifaceted anime I love, and here we get that in book form. So this book, even though I just said some parts are kind of lackluster, the whole story and the fun parts of this book make up for it.
Yeah. So in one of your notes here, you talk about Skysworn, although being an integral part of the series, it could be a stronger book. Can you tell us a little more about elements that you think could be stronger for this book?
Right. So I said as a standalone, it could be stronger. And what I mean by that, it opens with a highly anticipated fight, which was foreshadowed in the previous 2 books. And then you have these little moments that are fun and great and part of the story, and they're exciting. And then you have those lackluster stuff. So if the fight was at the end of Black Flame, and it ended with him losing his arm,
oh shoot!
And then we pick up with an armless Lindon and Skysworn, and then you have everything that happened in Skysworn, plus the prologue of the 5th book, which I listened to because it's set up in the 4th on Audible. That would be better, I think. That would make it, as a standalone, that would make it better. But because I know it's a series, I'm not going to crap on it too much.
Sure. And I think that's an observation that I made about the Star Wars book, where as a standalone book for book 2, it's like, But on the counterpoint, to emphasize what you just said, it's like if it was one book, you wouldn't notice that you lost Bane for a little while, right?
Yeah.
But I think that's interesting. That's a fun way to put it. Where if he would have lost his arm at the end of book 3, man, that would have been so enticing to go, what? And it's just like such a cliffhanger.
Yeah, but I also have a counterpoint to my counterpoint.
Okay.
Because Black Flame, he's imprisoned. The beginning of Skysworn, Jai Daishu's walking around, a cave, and he finds this Arc Stone. Well, before that, he tries to find something else, and Ethan beats him to that something else and writes nice try.
Oh, yeah.
So
there's ancient beast he wants to release back into the world, and Ethan's like, that's just, it's such a fun thing. Like, he's sneaking around, and Ethan's like, not so fast, bucko.
So there's already a pretty good cliffhanger in Black Flame because Lindon gets arrested, and there's a cool start to Skysworn with Jai Daisho and his little trollops through the caves, releasing Dread Gods. So it's fine that way. I can see Will Wight looking at this going, well, I have 2 cliffhangers, Lindon arrested or Lindon without an arm. And I think it was just a choice of, well, what's more expedient for the story? What makes the story flow
Yeah.
better? As it is laid out in front of me, I'm Will Wight pretending to be. I have this outline. What's easier for me and what flows better for what I'm trying to accomplish? So it's 6 of one, half a dozen of the other, I suppose. But I think a stronger cliffhanger would have been Lindon without an arm at the end of one book. Even if it means that one of the books is even shorter, but focuses on the arrest, the preparation, and the duel itself, and then ends with the arm being taken from Lindon, and then we get into book 5.
Yeah, there were different ways to slice it that I think could have been more. So I'd say that it's like an 8. Like, even though it's like, of all of the books, I think it's his weakest book in this series, which, I mean, look, he still did. People love this series, and they just did a Kickstarter recently to try to make this an actual anime, and it did pretty well. I think it did like 1.2 million, which is not enough to make the actual series yet, but it's a good start to be able to help him to do other fundraisers to build it up. So, of the series, I think it's his weakest book, but something that you could do, to your point, is chop it up in different ways, but I think you have to have pre-written the whole thing to decide where the best moments are.
Right.
I want to talk about anime real quick to bolster my point, where I used to, back in 2000, probably 10 or 9 or something like that, I had 2 guys that I was kind of friends with, and, well, we not kind of friends. We were friends back then, but we drifted because they were friends for the road, not friends for life. Like you and me, Slava. You can't get rid of me. I'm like a tumor.
Can't. You're like an uninvited guest.
Yes, that's true too. So we would watch movies or videos or whatever, and we would all together write on, what did I call the website? A Real Critic. So REEL. So it was like a film critic, like, because I was kitschy.
I'm tracking, yep.
Yeah. And
that's why you love my puns.
Yes. Well, one of the things that I'd watched for like pieces that I was doing was an anime called Sekirei. And this is like embarrassing at this point, but whatever. We're here. And I was analyzing the series. It's a shorter anime. The premise is that Sekirei are this like different type of being, but they look human, and they have a different type of genetic code, but they're all big-breasted women. It's one of these type of anime. I've told you this is embarrassing, like, but it's like, there was an analysis that I made on this that I've never forgotten because it's anime. The openers, they're the 20-minute episodes, like they're the 30-minute ones, but like with the commercial break, it's like 22 minutes or 20 minutes or whatever. The openers and the closers were always like big action on the front end, cliffhanger on the back end, and then the middle was always just a sag, like always just left you like, the middle's like whatever, and then they'd up it at the end and mic drop basically, so that you have to keep watching. And the series is only like 18 episodes or something like that. It's not. Maybe it's 12. It's like not a lot. And there was like only one season back then, and I think they came out with another season, but they never translated it over to American or English. And the premise is like humans need to swap spit with these characters to make them, to own them like Pokemon. I'm not kidding. Like, this is why I said this was embarrassing, Slava. But I watched it, and like, I took the episodes apart. I chopped it up into segments, and it's incredible that on such a short story of 20 minutes, if you have a good opener and a cliffhanger on the back end, you can get people to keep watching. Now, the big breasts, because I was younger, that also helped. But
so what you're saying is these are Pokemon that you can make out with.
Yeah. And the thing is, they all have special powers. Not sexual powers, but just like
No.
water and fire and whatever.
This is very tasteful, well thought out.
Look, it's a romance comedy. It's a harem genre. Like, so there's one young kid character, and he gets all these women and science. Like, look, it was published by Square Enix. Not everything they put out is great.
You mean it was published by the 13-year-old son of the guy who owns Square Enix?
Same.
No, I've never heard of that anime. I was too busy watching, Trigun and Cowboy Bebop.
Trigun was good.
Trigun was really good. There's like 4 series of Trigun. I like Trigun a lot. I like Evangelion. That's the kind of stuff I like.
Mm-hmm.
I agree with you. Your analogy to breasted Pokemon and this is
Wow.
apt, right?
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Was it
No,
titillating?
it's really apt. It's really apt because it does seem to in time just kind of lag, and then we get a little bit of a high note with the stuff I already mentioned: Orthos, the fight, Yaren's backstory, Drag Gods, Bleeding Phoenix. All that stuff is great, and then you're kind of like, all right, Ethan's having existential crises, and he's questioning himself, which is good in itself, but it's kind of short lived, and then we move on, right?
Yeah, it's a character development piece that I think we should have just spent a little time longer on. Not too much, because I think Ethan needs to be the Gandalf, where he doesn't really have a whole lot of problems in our eyes.
Mm-hmm.
He does, but just like in our eyes, he needs to not have a lot of problems so that we can rely on him as a character.
Right. Yeah. What plot points stood out to you above the rest?
Yeah, so some of the plot points that stood out first, and we've mentioned this, Lindon losing an arm. Like, main character losing a vital appendage is huge. It's huge. Like, okay, well, there's 8 other books. So what happens that this guy fights with one arm now? Right? Like, what is going on? Another plot point is Yaren's unwelcome guest, where we really get that tied in with the awakening of the Bleeding Phoenix. And, like, what are dread gods? Like, that's really big too. Very, very vital to the story. Like, those two things alone stood out to me in a big way. So Yaren's backstory is something that we haven't gotten to touch on yet, but I am excited for you to see what happens with this. And I think it gives us a little more compassion for Yaren, even though she's battle hardened and sharp and quick as a whip. But she, like, still in some ways has these like little girl moments. They're rare, but they're there. And I think that offers us so much character development for her as one of the party that we're in, because we don't go for it.
I like the way you worded that because I've always liked Yaren. I just thought she was a great character. For the same reasons, I didn't like Lift in Edge Lancer or Dancer by Sanderson because it seems like she was just nauseatingly annoying. Yeah, you had a hard life. Yeah, you're going through a thing. Shut up already. Yaren, the way she's written here, you understand why she's snippy and drawn into herself, and she's always fighting. She's a little bit hardened as a young woman. She's hardened already at this young age. And you can dig it because you're like, I understand this character and why she's doing what she's doing and why she's saying what she's saying. Finding out more about the backstory and how her family died after the attack and she had to fight this thing, the weight that she carries makes it a more compelling.
Now, so let's do it. Let's do a character comparison. Did you finish Edge Dancer?
Yep.
Okay. And I think I know the answer to this, but I want to hear how you think through this. Like, do a further deep dive between these two characters, because they both have different but difficult upbringings, right? On why you don't like Lift versus you do like Yaren. Like, can you unpack that more for us? It's probably going to get into, personal taste on the different backstories they had. Like, at what point was it, I like Lift, and then it's like, oh, actually, I don't like Lift. And then it's like, with Yaren, oh, I really like Yaren. Is it just the outworkings and the choices they made after their backstories, or is it more than that?
At its base, it's not the choices they make, because I can deal with Lift leaving the castle and going, this is not for me, even if that wasn't necessarily the truth, going to the other city to find darkness and do whatever she did there. Their choices and their characters, meaning how short they are, how flippant they are sometimes, how hardened they are. Well, the Lift is not really hardened. She's just an obnoxious youngster. That's it. That's all I get from her. Yaren, I get that this is a hardened young woman because of what she saw and experienced. What I found just grating and completely overplayed was Lift's shtick. We keep calling Wendell a dread god. No, calling Wendell a dread god. I'm mixing up worlds. A Voidbringer. Haha, funny. not funny in every page. Like, even if that was her thing for the whole book, not funny in every page. And her personality, this goes back to Vivenna. It's not her choices. It's not her ignorance. It's not her inability to read depth. It's her actual personality that's irritating. Same thing for Lift. She's unlikable. She's unnecessarily flippant and disrespectful, just constantly vomiting it out. And I get it. There's some characters are going to be like that. But if this is the main character and I'm supposed to care for her and follow her through the book, be with her in this adventure as she finds out that she's a Radiant and she finds out what her awesomeness really means, but she's kind of an annoying dweeb, even worse, irritating. Outside of her meeting Zeth and Nightblood and finding out she's a Radiant, and then that last few paragraphs, I didn't find it that interesting. Yaren is not irritating. She doesn't have a shtick. It's just Yaren. She's a hardened young woman. She was trained by a master sage, and she has this thing that she carries with her, literally and figuratively. And that's an interesting character. An obnoxious teenager thief that learns a lesson in the last three sentences of the book. It's like, okay. And listen, I'll even back up a little bit. We get to see more of the true Lift in those last three sentences. So, like, we get to see this hardened shell because life is hard and, this is how stories are written. But walking away from Edge Dancer, I felt annoyed by the character. I didn't feel like her arc was earned because she was just a bitch to Wendell and just annoying and irritating to everybody else. And then all of a sudden, she's hugging the guy that's been trying to kill her. And I get what Sanderson did with that scene. I'm just saying it's not earned. Vivenna is earned. Her arc is earned. Yaren, based on the little I know in 4 books, her arc will be earned. So that's all. Now, that's really it.
So this brings up a different question. The authenticity of characters, right? You feel like Lift is not authentic. That's what I heard. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Sure. Yeah, that's a good way of saying that's
because you constantly, well, this shtick, that shtick, blah blah blah. It's like, okay, you don't feel like this character's authentic. Yaren, you feel like is authentic.
Yep.
So, what is it that makes you believe the authenticity of a character? What are some of the bullet points? Because I think that this is it's not where I expected us to go, but I think it is interesting. And I'm sorry if you haven't read Edge Dancer, but pick any 2 characters that have similar broad stroke backstories, right? Like, and do the same experiment for yourself. Anyway, Slava, back to you.
For a character to be authentic, they have to have some eccentricity to them, quirks and faults and flaws and growth. And there's some stuff that they have to do exceptionally well. So they can't be a femme fatale, and they can't be just a Susan. And we're talking about female characters. We're comparing to 2 female characters. So they have to be well-rounded. They have to have things that they need to grow on. That's how good stories work. But they can't be simplistic and cliched. And I think Lift's shtick, to me, it seemed cliche for the reasons that I mentioned, because it's overplayed. Her shtick with Wendell, her internal dialogue when she's being portrayed as this rough and tough teenager who doesn't trust adults and life is hard. I get that she's hurt and she's trying to mask that hurt. And by masking that hurt, she comes off abrasive, even sometimes on purpose. Yaren's character is written that way. Lift's character is not. And I don't know why Sanderson chose the style that he did. Because at the end of the book, he tells me on the audible part, his voice comes on. He goes, "This is my favorite character, and I'm setting her up for something else in this world. Just wait. Everything's going to be okay. Don't worry. Blah, blah, blah." And it's a little cryptic. There's a sense of anticipation where does Lift go? At this point, I like Lift a little better because in the prologue, I was like, oh, this is kind of like a fun character. She seems quirky and, sarcastic. I like quirky and sarcastic.
Yep.
And then there was 17 chapters of what the hell is going on with this girl?
Sure.
And then the end was like, oh, okay, so I get it. She grew. Back to my point, it didn't seem earned. Does that make sense?
It does. So for quick summary, to make sure I understood you correctly, authentic characters in books to you require a little bit of quirkiness, a little bit of well-roundedness, and their journey overall needs to be earned.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Right. Because they had to be dynamic characters. Because the static characters, they're the ones in the background.
Sure, yeah, no one cares. Yeah.
Yeah, so they're dynamic characters in the literary sense.
Mm-hmm.
They have to be a well-rounded character, and that means that they do have flaws and they do have eccentricities, and not all of them had to be funny and sarcastic, because Wit is different than Kaladin, and Kaladin is different than Shashara, right? And like all the, I'm just saying,
Shashara's dead. Good job picking a dead character.
yeah. I meant Shallan.
Yes.
But so
Kaladin is alive and Shashara is dead. Good job, Slava.
And characters.
Look, most of the time I don't make fun of your stuff that you say, but this one's just like, that's great. I know you meant Shallan, but that's
yeah.
Kaladin's alive. Shashara's dead. Different characters. These are very different characters.
Different books too. Different books. So that's the Way of Kings audience, for those who don't know, who are part of this acid trip conversation with us.
Yeah.
So you have all these characters, right? And they're all different. Kaladin's different. Shallan is different. They all have their own things they're good and bad at, their own character arcs, their own shtick even. And some of the shtick, with the Kaladin always being morose for, 17 chapters, you're like, okay, Kaladin, calm down. And I understand what place he's in. He's a slave. Like, so it's not, I'm not being flippant about his situation. But after a while, as you're reading, you're like, oh my gosh, okay, I get it. You're sad.
How do you even spend time with yourself? Come on, man.
Like you're sad. So I understand that you have to write a character and you have to continually show his flaws and then how he or she overcomes those flaws and overcomes adversity in their life. I just don't think Lift is earned, and I don't think it's written in a way where she's well-rounded. She's just an annoying teenager with some angst. And some of it maybe rightfully so, in the sense that there's no other way. This is how humans react to trauma and how they hide in themselves, shell up, and then, are abrasive and push people away because they're scared. Yeah, okay, I get that. That's a good story. It's been told 1,000 times, but it's not a boring one.
Yaren does the same thing.
Yaren does the same thing, and I like Yaren. I hope that answers your question.
It does. I think it does, yeah.
Let me share one of the plot points that stood out with me, and it's a very minor one. It's a few days before the duel with Jylong, Lindon and Jylong. They're set to face each other, and Fisher Gesha equips Lindon with numerous constructs, making him look almost clownish.
Yes.
And on the day of the duel, they disarm Lindon of all the weapons above his advancement level and lead him to the arena to fight Jylong. And so, him being disarmed of all the weapons, he thought were going to help him. And this is kind of Lindon's shtick.
Yep, there it is. There it is.
Where he's always trying to find a way out. He's always trying to, not necessarily an easy way out, but he always wants to hedge his bets. He also wants to find an advantage. And understandably so. I don't blame Lindon for this. Understandably so, for where he came from. But here, he gets all that taken away, and he gets to fight. And he doesn't do a bad job. And maybe Jylong's being gentle, but he doesn't do a bad job. He actually breaks the Ancestor Spear with his Black Flame thing. But because Jylong is ordered to incapacitate him somehow, he takes his arm. That little bit, outside of everything, even parts that were more interesting than that bit, stayed with me throughout the whole reading of the book. And how he processes the fight, it's different than anything else he's done so far, even the training. And you see him using this one and Gratitude Less. You see him pushing back against Ethan, and he's like, hey, dude, like, my arm.
I lost
was
an
it
arm.
worth it?
Yeah.
And he even realizes what he did was wrong when he sees Lindon passed out, bleeding out of his, elbow because he has no arm.
This is the first time that we were confronted with, like, oh, Ethan messed up. There's a cost, and Ethan paid it with someone else's life, someone else's blood, right? And we don't get that very often. We sort of see it at the end of book 2, where Ethan has taken Lindon and he's like, hey, I'm going to keep stabbing you with these serpents to help you form an iron body. And we're like, oh, I mean, yeah, it's kind of forced, but I get it. Like, he needs to level up really quickly. All right, fine. And then in book 3, we see Ethan again puppet stringing Lindon to like pick a path for his second core, and he's like, "Oh, well, you can pick whatever path you want, but this is the one that you probably should."
So I'm going to read a little section of the book.
Sure.
So this is page 116 in the Kindle version. Lindon meant to ask about the destruction part of that sentence, and to set it up for the audience, Ethan is telling him about the dread gods coming. He knew it. It was bait, set by Ethan trying to capture Lindon's interest and attention. Normally, it would have worked. This time, Lindon shrugged his right shoulder, drawing attention to his missing arm. You could have finished off Jai Long immediately. Ethan's smile faded. I could have, yes. You drew it out. You were trying to get him to bring out that crystal ball. The Arkstone, it's a... Lindon cut him off. He took my arm. Ethan clasped his hands behind his back and studied his disciple. Instead of deflecting or pointing out that technically Jai Long was the one who removed the arm, which would be typical Ethan tactics, the Underlord simply nodded. He did. If he hadn't given the order, Jai Long would have left you alone. If I hadn't put him under such pressure, he wouldn't have given the order. The admission both made Lindon feel better and much, much worse. It tore open the bandage he wrapped up around his anger, and he could feel tears welling up in the corners of his eyes. Why, he said, why did you have to push him? I just want to know it was worth it. Ethan looked at the ceiling for a moment, considering, looked back down at Lindon. What do you know about the dread gods? And then they continue to talk about the dread gods. But it's this moment where Ethan is, yes, our Gandalf, for lack of a better term. I think that was a good analogy. Even Ethan needs to grow. So how is he going to go to the top, to the end of the sacred arts if he doesn't grow? If he's perfect, he should be at the end of the sacred arts, drawing Lindon to him or something, right? But even he has a marble from Serial. Even he is trying to go somewhere beyond himself where Osriel is calling him to. And Osriel had his own arc, which we're not privy to yet, and his own growth, or why he left the Abaddon and doing whatever the heck he's doing, wherever the heck he is.
Yeah.
So it's a great way of saying that, hey, even Gandalf, Ethan, needs a growth story. And that moment that I read right there, I think that's where Ethan finally, to himself, but as Ethan, he's not going to give a lot away. He has to save face, and he has to be Ethan. But he recognizes that maybe this wasn't the best way of doing it.
Right.
He doesn't really admit it. He doesn't admit it even within the book. But he sees that, at least this is the way I read it, he sees that Lindon is just not a means to an end.
Right. This is one of the moments that sticks out to me in this book, because Ethan doesn't have a lot of vulnerable moments in the series here. And so pausing on this emotional beat, I honestly think we could have spent a little more time there. But the thing is, Will, even in the pausing on this emotional beat, has this funny moment where he says, and you read it and it just makes me laugh.
Instead of deflecting or pointing out that technically Jai Long is the one who removed the arm, which would be typical Ethan tactics.
But it's like this emotional moment, and Will's like, and just a little bit of, okay, back to the moment.
Yeah.
That was exactly what I was thinking of. Ethan doesn't get to experience these moments unless there's a super high cost. And at this stage in the series, like, Ethan loves Yaren and Lindon. I really believe that.
He does. And when I said it means to an end, I don't mean that he completely is just using Ethan and Aaron. He sees potential. He loves them probably at this point.
Yeah.
But his character uses people and uses situations to his advantage, and he's a little flippant in times. And because he achieved the status that he has, and because he has the brain and charisma that he has, he's a little bit full of himself.
He's like wit.
And he now realizes, oh, not everything is funny. Not everything that's uncomfortable can be fixed or avoided with a wave of a hand or a flippant remark. It's definitely where he has to take stock of the situation.
We even get the intro to this section where Fisher Gesha is scolding him. And, we're
Yeah.
4 books in, and the hierarchy of these books is it's all power-based. But Fisher Gesha steps into her grandmother role, telling him that she needs to cut it out, or he needs to cut it out and give Lindon a break. This is the culmination of his not cutting it out, and kind of shames him a bit to really bring him down. And I think that we get to see a moment of maturity with Ethan because we only see his jovial side most times. And a little behind the curtains here for folks and you, Slava. The reason Ethan is joyful all the time is he's trying to achieve the icon of joy. This is a power item that hasn't existed yet in the story for you, but there are these things called icons, and they assist in battle, if you will. But they only are achieved in moments of great duress/elation, but they can only happen if you are embodying the thing that the icon is named after. Part of the reason, and he'll reveal that later, is he's going after the icon of joy. And you'll see other icons as well throughout the story, but that's a little behind the curtain. Back to Fisher Gesha. But he handles this with real maturity, and I think that allows us to see the well-roundedness of Ethan's character, because frankly, to your point about authentic characters, like, we don't have a really well-rounded look at Ethan. He seems to know everything and to be our guide, which is very important to stories. But by seeing this moment of like, hey, he screwed up and he's getting reprimanded by someone who's his lesser power-wise, but his better age-wise, we get that well-roundedness of like, no, he's mature enough to take some rebuke from people that he deserves it from. Because we also see him get rebuked later in the book from like other people who are rich and powerful. And he's like, nah, it's fine. But like for Fisher Gesha, he's like, sorry, grandmother, you're right.
Yeah, I'll take your words to heart.
Yeah, which is different. Like, that's a very stark contrast for a character like this that it's very easy to gloss over, right?
Yeah, and that's what makes him authentic. Yes, he's flippant. Yes, he is sarcastic. And he sometimes uses people as a means to an end. And he doesn't weigh the cost of things. But when he's telling some overlord to go pound salt, it's different because you're kind of with him. You're like, yeah, the overlord might be right, but Ethan's my guy. Ethan's my guy, and I'm going to back him up. And then when Fisher Gesha, even though I don't like her that much, she seems like an ordinary old hag, but she's on our side. So she's our ordinary old hag. So that's the difference. And when she rebukes him, you're proud for Ethan to take a step back and even bow to her.
Yeah.
Right? Calling her grandmother, which is a term of endearment, a term of respect.
Mm-hmm.
And because Ethan's our asshole, you're happy that he grows.
It's like, this might be the best scene in the book. And then second best is him losing the arm. I really think that's the case. And it's just because it's such a contrast to the series itself, where we don't get moments like this very often. Like, we get some snippets here and there, but I would say if there's one place for Will Wight to grow as an author, it's to give us more moments like this. In his other series that I read, and I haven't read all of his series, but the newest one called, I don't even know what the series is called, but it's The Captain and the Engineer, which is set in the same universe, but it's like space plus magic plus fantasy. It's very unique.
I think it's called The Captain.
It's called The Captain, and then the second book is called The Engineer. So, like, that's the name of the book, but that's not the name of the series.
I got you. No, I'm tracking now.
Having more moments, and if he doesn't want to do that, that's fine, right? If he just wants to be like a fast-paced, action-oriented, like fun, kitschy, like snippets of authenticity, power to him, right? But I think if he wants to grow as a well-rounded author, I think we need more moments. And he might write these, and he just might remove them, right? We don't know. But I think that this is like one encouragement to him as an author to go, hey, I think that you should give us more time with this authentic part of people's humanity. It's what touches us. It's what moves us. And it honestly holds more power and impact because they're so few and far between.
I'll agree.
You'll buy that for $1?
I'll buy that for $1. For a sphere.
Different book. They use Madra, not chips, not coins. Tokens? No, tokens isn't right. Tablets. No, what is it called?
Scales. They're called scales.
Yes, Scales. So, wrong book, Scales. What are your thoughts on the way that the world is unfolding? So, we're 4 books in on this, right? And the world continues to get larger, piece by piece, bit by bit. Do you like that? Do you hate that? Talk to us about that for a minute.
I'm okay with that. Meaning the way it's being unfolded. Totally on board. I am excited to learn more about this world. Specifically, what I'm very interested in is the Abaddon and Siriel
Mm-hmm.
and Osriel.
Mm-hmm.
I am more interested in Lindon and Yaren and where they go. But the peek behind the curtain, so to speak, for the Abaddon, I want more of that.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure it'll happen. There's
Yeah,
6
yeah.
more books, 7 more books to go.
8.
8 more books to go. I know math.
Math is a skill I was taught at one point.
So 8 more books. What Will does well is each book you get to learn with the characters. Because now we're with the Skysworn, and you get a peek at their philosophy, their way of doing things.
Mm-hmm.
And you got a peek at Black Flame, last book. And then the next book, I'm sure we'll get another clan, another reveal of what's to come, right? And as the characters grow, they learn more about the world around them and that it's bigger than they think. They learn about themselves. They learn about each other. They grow in their sacred arts abilities. And that incremental peeling back of the onion, incremental building of the world, I think is fantastic. It keeps me interested because the growth of the characters, the action scenes, all the funny shit that Orthos does, all the crazy stuff that Aethon does. You get these things that you've grown to enjoy and love, and these people that you've grown to enjoy over the past 4 books. And I know that in book 5, it'll be the same people that I've come to enjoy in a different scenario, fighting different things. And that's what I enjoy. Now, a caveat for those who have been with us for a while and for you, there's some things, and this is specific to Way of Kings and the Stormlight Archives, and this is our continual battle, that I want to know before I read. I want to know a backstory. I want to know what the hell a Dawnchart is without all the spoilers that you think that might give me. And that's not a setup for you. That's just me explaining myself. And then when I read about the Dawnchart when it's revealed, I still love the reveal. I'm still immersed in the book, but I'm like, I know this because 2 months ago, Jonathan told me this. But this is a different world. The way this is set up, I don't care to know any spoilers about Cradle. I know the next book will be something crazy and intense and funny and great. But what I'm following in Will Wight's world is these characters. But Sanderson's world is immense. And it's 10 times the size of this, if not 100. So there's more for me to pick apart. Here, there's nothing to pick apart. It's just a really big world that I'm getting in chunks. And I don't know why. Maybe it's just me, the way Slava's built. Will Wight's, I am happy at the pace that I'm learning about the world.
It's definitely a different author style where Sanderson, I mean, he wrote 20 novels before he had his first published novel. So he's like been living in his Cosmere for, let's say 30 years, right? Like just pick a number before he like got started publicly per se. Will, on the other hand, seems to write in a way where each book he adds new elements to the world and magic items and magic things. Like book 5, because we're getting to that here very shortly, it's called Ghostwater. And the book starts out by the crew going into something called a pocket world, where there's a character who built a world within a world, and they get to go into it to find items and da-da-da-da, whatever. And it's like, that concept? Love that concept. But, like, no foreshadowing for it. And so, to me, his authorship is like, oh, hey, I need to do something else that's bigger and more fun, which he does. But the thing is, none of it really contradicts itself. So he, like, and I think this is a lot harder than, like, planning something out and making sure stuff works together. And maybe he does have a plan and it just doesn't feel like it in the writing. That's very possible, right? It seems like he just slaps new things into the next book, which is cool because I'm like, wow, you have to make sure this still fits and doesn't break the system. And somehow he does it. Like throughout all 12 books, like there's not really a moment that I'm like, oh, this might break the system, so we'll look past it. It's like, no, this all works, which is difficult.
Stephen King does it this way, and I think a lot of authors. I'm just referencing Stephen King because we've just finished it. It's dropping a few books ago. It dropped a few books ago. King says that he writes a story. Let's take It, for example. He conceived the idea of It walking over a bridge late at night and thinking, hey, 3 goats Billy Gruff. Wouldn't that be interesting to write a story about that, but with a supernatural horror element to it? So he has like a framework. And then he starts writing. And the way he described his writing in general, using The Stand as an example, and he goes, I write every book like that. I just start writing and go where the characters take me. So there's a part in The Stand where a bunch of characters die. And in an interview, he said, I didn't know to do these characters. They've served out their purpose. So I just killed them all in an explosion. That's a big peek behind the curtain. And if you're susceptible to disappointment, never meet your heroes kind of guy.
Sure.
That's like ruins the book for you. Like, really? That's why they died in an explosion? Because you didn't want to write any more of their stories? You're like, these guys, they're dead. But Will Wight might be of the same class of writers where he starts this book unsold, and maybe he had an idea for 3 series, maybe all the time he had an idea for a longer series.
Mm-hmm.
But he's taken Lindon from world to world. He adds Ethan, he adds Yaren, then he adds the turtle.
Yeah. And I love the contrast here of the different authors and the different styles. And I'm not just talking about the fantasy authors. I'm talking about like also the Aronofsky brothers. What are
their name is Arkady and Boris Strugatsky.
Strugatsky. Yeah, it's close enough. Yep. American-wise. Close enough. So Strugatsky brothers, where they, wrote in a specific way as well, where that's one of the beauties I love about reading books is each author can be really good at their writing style and similar to, say, a personality test, right? You can have different pieces that make up how you execute on the same internal premise, whether that's, hey, me and this other guy really love wisdom literature, and I'm more of a captain and command things, and he's more of a healer and like invites people into the wisdom as opposed to like shouting it at them in the middle of like boot camp, which would be more of my execution style, which doesn't always go well, I'll tell you that. But, hammer's not always the perfect tool for everything. But if you know how to use it well, you can use it in ways that people aren't expecting and then have it be just as fun for them, even though they're like, oh, wow, I didn't think about that. But one thing I wanted to mention before we move toward a close is this idea of what do you do with characters, just like you said that King mentions, what do you do with characters when you're done with them, when you don't know what to do with them? And I think that good authors do allow themselves to kill the characters off because sometimes they don't serve a purpose anymore. And I don't know of any authors that have kept characters that didn't serve purposes anymore because it really just distracts. So I think you do have to kill them off or make them move town or like whatever.
Or they fade into the background.
Sure. But I think that's a little harder if it's like a bad guy, right?
Oh, yeah. I think in Will Wight's world, literary world, I think it's easier to do that because you could have somebody that's part of the gang with Fisher Gasha and Yaren, Lindon and Ethan, and you could have somebody come in, serve a purpose, and then just leave the scene. And maybe that's more of what you were saying than them just fading into the background where they're still kind of there, but not. That might be a hard or redundant or unnecessary.
I think it's easier for characters that we like and we're growing with, like Little Blue. First half of the book, you don't see her at all, right? But I'm going to tell you, she's still here for the rest of the 12 books. There are things that she has to offer. She just doesn't have anything to offer right now. And that's fine.
Yeah. And I guess that's what I was saying. So
Makes sense. As we reach a close here on this episode and we crash our flying fortress into the ground, talk to me about the Bleeding Phoenix, the Dread God. We don't know a whole lot about Dread Gods yet. We see that there's some sort of connection between the Bleeding Phoenix and Yaren. So what are your thoughts? What are your speculations? And then, what did you think about the moment when they were fighting all those Bloodspawn and Red Hook? Was there anything that stuck out to you there?
The question I have is, where do the Dread Gods come from? What are their origin? The Bleeding Phoenix, from what I read, from what I understood from the text, is very strong. It has great physical strength. These things that are now in the world pose a great danger to our band of sacred artists. And apparently it can be physically destroyed, but it's only temporary because it always comes back.
What we know is that they can't be destroyed. They just can be rerouted and encouraged to go back to sleep because they feed on Madra, which is why when What's-His-Face opens the labyrinth to go find treasures, the amount of Madra that comes out of there and then the specific type of Madra that comes out of there is what draws and awakens the Dread Gods. So if they're close by in the labyrinth door that he opened, which the Bleeding Phoenix was, that's what provokes it and stirs it to reawaken. And so monarchs, who are the top tier class level, there's nothing higher than a monarch in this world. We see a monarch for the first time, and there's not a lot of them, but they do exist. Even they, fighting together, can't destroy one of these.
And apparently, from what I understand, the Blood Shadow, specifically, the Blood Shadows that are part of the Dread God, part of Bleeding Phoenix, they are somehow extensions of the Bleeding Phoenix. They feed parasitically on a host's Madra, blood, and life. And then when they're done with the host, they take back the power and deliver it to the Bleeding Phoenix. Yes?
Yep.
It's a nice setup for what might happen in books 5, 6, and 7. I'm just guessing that we see them in the next few books. At least the next book, right?
Yeah, I mean, the Dread Gods are going to be a regular side piece for at least the next couple books.
And apparently there's also a cult that is surrounding these people, as always, because people are people.
Well, and that's part of Yaren's backstory, too. Like, part of what she gets at is that the reason that her town was destroyed was because her town was not the cult itself, but, like, just outside the cult, where it's like, hey, we've noticed that there's power in these things.
Oh, yeah.
We should probably dabble with it. And then they lit a fire on their town because someone's blood hit the ground.
Right. Okay. Now, I remember that now. Okay. It's all coming back to me. So, as in every story, people messing around with things they shouldn't, experimenting with things they shouldn't, creates the Bleeding Phoenix. And now the world is worse off because of people.
Great. Well, folks, that is today's side quest. We are halfway through Skysworn. We will find out more about some of the new characters we're going to meet in the second half of Skysworn and what happens to the Bleeding Phoenix and how Skysworn ends to set us up for Ghostwater, which is book 5. And if you haven't put it together yet, we are going to finish this series. It's on our schedule almost completely, which I'm excited about, and just doing some build up for it. So 12 books, we're 4 books deep, and we're 30% of the way done. Can't wait to experience the rest of this journey and the twists and turns that Yaren, Lindon, Orthos, Little Blue, and Fisher Gesha, and Athan, I didn't realize how big of a mouthful this was going to be, will go on together through
the labyrinth,
the other books.
That is Cradle.
Be sure to hit that subscribe button so that you never miss a side quest.
And may you find a soulsmith that can build you a spine, in case you need one.
Thanks, Orthos.